Good day, everyone. Uh, Whatever you are, I hope you're having a great time. My name is Renato Puccini. I'm director of Parasoft Americas. With me here is Grigory Trofimov, one of our most experienced solution architects. And thanks for joining us today as we're going to talk about applying service virtualization and test data management to training environments to help a hybrid workforce and partners and people onboarding marketplaces and so on. Normally, when we talk about virtual environments, the most traditional application, I believe, is software testing. People virtualize services, virtualize systems, virtualize third-party integrations, so they can do integrated testing on their applications earlier in the cycle. I know a few months ago, Grigori delivered a webinar about sandboxes, also for compliance and things like that. And today we're going to talk about employee training and onboarding. So that initial experience when you hire someone to your team, to your contact center, to your stores. And we're also going to talk about the same kind of application when you're onboarding partners to your marketplace. So are the two scenarios we're going to be covering today. Typically, people want to have great training environments, and there are some common requirements where the main goal is to provide an enhanced onboarding experience. So that leads usually to higher retention, be that of your employees or of your partners who are using your marketplace to sell their products and services. Common requirements would be that environment be interactive, not only videos that people will be watching and usually disengage after a few minutes. Have a consistent training experience that also is very helpful for those creating the training flow, creating the training materials, the lab exercises. When the environment is consistently the same, it makes it much easier because you can focus on very prescriptive instructions to those going through the training labs. Keep the environment up to date. So whatever people learn in that training environment when they're doing the hands-on exercises matches exactly the live systems they're going to be working with. And in today's world, with most people working from home or in some sort of hybrid workforce, or often even near shore or offshore, having the training environment available as needed without any sort of time zone limitations or training room where people have to physically be in, it became a must. Along with the flexibility of adding new systems, training for new roles, new training scenarios as companies release new products or go through their digital transformation and new services become available online, the staff handling that, the partners using those systems, they need that training to match, again, anything new that they see in the live systems. What are the difficulties, the challenges of creating a training environment? And anyone who's done that before know that when you stand up one application, let's say the point of sale, or let's say the contact center application that your agents will be using when talking to your customers, you're actually standing up many applications because nothing exists in a vacuum within a corporate structure, right? That main application, that front-end application, will be talking to inventory, to customer information, whatever you keep, maybe it's credit card information or customer profile accounts. It's so many applications depending on the service you're providing that you always have to worry about their availability, or especially if they're third-party applications out of your control, service providers. You have to worry about their behavior because, again, going back to the training environment requirements, you want that experience to be consistent. You want the instructions on the training materials to be precise, easy to follow. And then you have to also worry about their cost. It's so easy to have cost overruns when you want to set up a proper training environment, because now you're talking about either on-prem or in the cloud. You're talking about virtual servers, databases, middleware. sometimes packaged applications where you got to pay to have an extra instance of that application running on your training environment. The bill can easily run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, or often over millions of dollars over time, depending on how complex and how many applications we're talking about here. And then there's the data, because again, you want the trainees having that easy experience where when they type in a customer number or an account number or a mobile phone number, whatever the use case they're going through, that information is there as described in the training instructions, ready for them to perform that scenario. Let's say activate a phone or cancel a credit card or whatever needs to be done. You want that to be there and accurately represented in the application they're using for their training exercises. So going from those traditional challenges, we move to service virtualization to address most of them. So instead of waiting for access to shared systems or third-party services or things with limited availability, for instance, a mainframe system, which would be very costly to instantiate for training purposes, you can go and create a copy of that service, a copy of that application that has the data model, the data information, everything you need to simulate the scenarios you need whenever you need. Instead of having an inconsistent experience because, let's say, trainee number 1 canceled an account or closed an account, and then trainee number 2 has the same account number and now tries to cancel that account, and it's already been canceled, right? So that, to use a very simple scenario, you can always, with virtual services, just go and reset all that environment to a known state whenever you need. And the beauty of it is you can have individual environments at extremely low cost and replicate that to hundreds of people that are being onboarded in your environment without one person affecting what the other person is doing or even being aware of what the other people are doing. Which leads to the third one, is kind of a consequence of the second one, the training data. In the past, if you had a class of 12 new employees being onboarded, you would need 12 different customer IDs, 12 different account numbers, 12 of everything, so they don't interfere with each other, for instance, by burning data, canceling something, deleting something. Instead, you use synthetic data and multiple instances of the same virtual services with that data. So each and every person has an individual, unique experience with zero interference from the others, and the best part of it, very realistic experience. So to kind of summarize a little bit where we are here, the goal number 1 is to provide on-demand access, so everyone can do hands-on training at their own convenient pace and time. You can easily manage that environment, reset, update, add data, add scenarios, and scale it up and down to accommodate the volume you have. So it doesn't matter if today you're training 3 or 300 people, the same environment can still handle it. We want it to mirror real-world behavior, emulating everything with accuracy without ever touching real production data or without ever providing any sort of access to bad actors, that can come from exposing real systems or copy of real data into less secure environments like training environments. You want to deliver consistent training. So replicating all the scenarios to the specific needs of that person. If that person is selling mobile devices at a store in a mall, you want them to have all the scenarios they can go through, selling prepaid, postpaid, reactivating, changing a plan, all those sorts of things, versus someone being in a branch of your bank and having to do all the operations, like, for instance, a mortgage application, a credit card application, right? So, and again, be able to reset that whenever a person's session is over, which is a process that can also be automated. In a nutshell, if we're to look at that visually, think about you're onboarding someone to your marketplace, a partner. You have an agent reselling your products and services, or you have a new hire joining your team, your branch, your contact center, anyone who's customer facing or interacting with customers. You have the application they use here on a web browser or a dedicated client. But the key difference is all the back end to that application, which sometimes runs into dozens of systems. You virtualize those services, and now you can have the exact data they need to, let's say, activate a new mobile device. Or if you're a bank, open a new account. If you're an airline, books, reschedule a flight, change something, buy options. If you're a retailer, how do you authorize a return, a refund? How do you run through the different scenarios and different policies for each partner you have in your marketplace? You can put data and behavior for all of those scenarios easily into those virtual services, manage them, update them without having to provision, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars in systems, infrastructure, databases, and personnel to have actual copies of those systems, right? And you do it all with virtual learning data. So I think that's enough of me talking for now. I'm going to hand it over to Grigori, and he will actually do a quick demonstration of how that would work. Grigori, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Renato. Just a quick note, for during the course of the presentation, if you do have any questions, please feel free to submit any questions into the chat or the question box, and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the presentation. That being said, let's take a look at our technical demonstration today. So with regards to standing up complex virtual learning environments, service virtualization checks all the boxes. We're going to see how we can provision and validate complex environments on demand, build realistic, dynamic, and scalable application behavior, easily administrate and control deployed training environments, and create and manipulate data without impacting other team members. In the context of today's presentation, what we'll see is an application called Parabank. So I will be taking a role of a trainee who will need to work through some flows, right, in order to get up to speed with how my Parabank application works. Virtualize service virtualization will be leveraged to simulate the backend services, right? The backend APIs, simulate virtual data, and this will enable the portability and the low cost deployment of these virtual learning environments. So I'm going to go ahead and switch perspectives here. And you should be able to see my screen here. And this is Parabank, right? So as a trainee, someone who is looking to familiarize myself with this Parabank application, one of the common flows that I may need to do with customers is update contact information, right? And within the UI, it's a pretty straightforward flow. I just go ahead and update some data here, the address, the zip code, the phone number, etc., and then go ahead and say update profile. But on the back end, what we actually have is a set of APIs, right? A set of APIs or resources, and these resources are directly tied to our application that we're learning, that we're being trained on. For example, for the profile update, we have a post customer update. Customer ID, right? So on the back end, when I'm interacting with the front end of the application, this application is actually talking to these APIs and making these calls against the backend system and the backend data. So this is really the main problem here is how do we provide these virtual learning environments in a way that we can have separate backend systems. We can have unique APIs, unique data sets for everybody, so that everybody can update contact information without impacting other trainees' data, other employees' data. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage service virtualization in order to stand up a set of these backend services that will fulfill our requirements for learning this application. Now, you'll also notice that this API contains a lot of different resources and a lot of different resource types, positions, loans, JMS services, data management operations. If we're exposing a virtual learning environment, we don't necessarily have to virtualize every single one of these types of resources. We need to provide enough of an environment to fulfill some of our key criteria, which is to for example, in our case, update contact information. And we can do just that. So I actually have a virtual service already deployed. And this virtual service is actually just a subset of our real application. And the subset has some of the key resources that we will leverage for our trading environment, including what we just saw is, get customer information, update customer information, create accounts, etc. And if we actually if we take a look at one of these, right? For example, get customer ID. Let's just validate that in fact we can perform this operation. And if we take a look at it, it's returning some data, right? Some first name, last name, address information, phone number, social security number. If we take a look at the back end to our service, we actually have this data set contained within our application. So if we take a look at this customer ID 111, we'll see that there's some first name, there's some last name associated with it, address information, so on and so forth. This is explicitly the data that we are able to simulate. This is explicitly the service that we're simulating for our Parabank application. If we make changes here, right? Let's say we want to update some contact information. For example, instead of Parasoft, let's change the last name to Bright Talk, and I'll go ahead and make that change. If I run this operation one more time, the data is reflected in our backend service, in our API. But we typically want a more realistic behavior, right? If I am making changes to update the contact info, that contact info should be able to update directly within our REST API, right? And so essentially, we're making this post call. We're making a post call directly to the backend service to update that customer information. And rather than going through any test data modules or any backdoor services in order to modify that data, we would make that call as an API. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's make a call against our backend service. Customer ID. We'll feed some data here, right? We'll change the last name from we have it currently set to Bright Talk. We'll change it to Demo. We'll update the address to some unique address. For example, 1234 Fake Street in Beverly Hills. This is actually a real address, by the way. So if you're looking for a real address to use in your test data, and the zip code is 90210. Social security number, let's add that here. And then we'll need some credentials to actually make this update. Okay, let's go ahead and run this call. So we're going to get some response from our backend service. And now that this data is updated in our virtual data set, what we should see is that if we refresh this data set, we should see this data reflected directly in our backend, right? So the last name was updated, the address was updated. If we go back to our API resources and we run our get call one more time for that same customer ID, there it is. Again, that data is reflected directly in our APIs, in our backend services. Additionally, since we are providing this virtual learning environment, right, we're simulating these APIs, we can actually add additional services that are not actually covered by our core Parabank application. For example, these virtual learning environments should be dynamic, right? If we make modifications to our data sets, we should be able to refresh the data set to its initial state. In Renato's example, there's the Jenga tower, right? And that's kind of what happens in shared environments is when somebody consumes a record, when somebody makes changes to a record inside your data set, even if even if we go back and update this data to what it was initially, it's essentially like placing a piece from the Jenga set back on top, right? Although all the data is still there, it's not necessarily in its initial state. And that's what we really want anytime we deploy a new virtual learning environment. So for example, what we can do is we can leverage operations like reset sandbox, for example, right? So if we go ahead and try this out, what this is going to do, it's going to make a call to our backend services to bring our application data back to its initial state. If we navigate back to our data set here and we refresh it again, let's just take a look at it here. What we should see is that the first name, last name, were all reverted to its initial state. The address is back to its initial state, and um, and everything else is kind of exactly where we started. So if we go back to our deck here and take a look at what we saw as an example, I, as an employee, am able to access Parabank. We've connected Parabank to a set of simulated backend services. And the way these backend services are designed and defined, anytime a new user wants to connect or be trained on a specific functionality inside of Parabank, we can simply clone uh, our virtual backend services as well as our simulated virtual data so that other users like myself are not impacted. Additionally, if we have partners that might need to integrate with our application, we can expose these services. We can expose our virtual learning environment backends to those partners so they can integrate their solutions with our services as well. And finally, this model can actually be scaled out uh, to not only contain all of these services and all these virtual data sets in one place, isolated on paths or something else, but actually isolated on unique servers. So let's take a look at that here. So currently, I have a virtual service that's deployed on some URL, right? Some URL, some port, and let's say I have a requirement to stand up, 5 or 10 more virtual learning environments for new employees that we're onboarding or that we're training. So what we can actually do here is we can define that process. We can define the creation of these virtual learning environments in a set of API calls or REST API calls, or basically just define it in one place in a way that we can also then customize how these virtual environments are deployed. So for example, if I want to stand up a virtual learning environment for a user named Alice, I can go ahead and define that here. We'll provide a unique port for the service, and that's it. At that point, I can go ahead and say execute. So while this step is executing, just to reiterate what we're going to see, we're going to see a clone copy of our virtual learning environment backend services being stood up on a unique port in a unique location in its initial state, without us actually having to contribute in any kind of cost, in any kind of additional infrastructure, um, or any other backend databases, mainframes, etc., all managed through a virtual service as well as a virtual backend data set. As that operation is actually executing, I'm going to go ahead and refresh our test data here. And what we should see is we should see a new data repository. It's called Sandbox VLE Alice, right, for our new user. It's got all the same data here that we would expect. This is our initial synthetic data that we're using for for our backend services. And if we take a look at our catalog of virtual services that are currently deployed, we can see the job to create a new virtual service did execute. And what we should also see is we should see a new deployment here that we can copy. And if I go ahead and explore this API, there it is, right? These are all of the same operations that we defined in our virtual learning environment backend, all the same operations as far as the ability to get users. So we can go ahead and run this one more time to validate that we have our baseline synthetic data for users where we can modify and update their contact information. We can perform all the same operations without impacting any other users, whether it's Bob, whether it's John, whether it's someone else who's being onboarded. These are completely isolated environments. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the slides here. To reiterate, we're able to stand up complex dynamic virtual services with isolated backend data. The services themselves are not impacting any users. The scalability of these backend services can be defined either in on a single server or scaled out to multiple servers, whether you're using containers, whether you're using OpenShift or some other container orchestration platforms. That can all be programmatically defined so that those containers and those pods can be easily stood up with their own unique learning environments. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back to Renato.
Thank you, Grigori. That was excellent. And I hope it was a good illustration, a bit more on the technical side of how we can do that, right? All the back end, of course, in front of that lies, in our case, Parabank. In your case, it would be your application, either the interface you expose to your partners, onboarding their products and services to your marketplace, or the system used by your customer call center agent, by your point of sales employee or partner, reseller. But the key is on the back end, and what you saw there was Grigori using very common, I think the most common technology, which are swaggers. But there are, I think, over 100 other different message formats and protocols that our technology can emulate. So even if you have legacy systems on the back end, we can support most cases. And with the goal, again, when you think about this, providing high quality virtual learning environments, usually the main goal for the business is to reduce attrition. Once you acquire a customer to your marketplace, or once you hire a new employee, you want them to stay, you want them to be successful, you want them to be able to just succeed in executing their tasks. So to recap, hands-on experience, be able to scale the environment up and down on demand, easily reset the environments, as Grigori shown there, to a known state, right? Using virtual safe data without ever cloning, moving, masking data from production, because that can open you up to all sorts of regulatory and security issues. Make it very cheap, very simple, so you don't need to manage dozens of virtual servers or containers, databases, and the middleware and everything simply to deliver a good training environment. And by the way, if your team is already using service virtualization today for QA, for testing, it's very easy to leverage those assets to create a virtual training environment, and then you can actually shorten the delivery timeline for that very quickly. I hope this was a great, useful use of your time here with this quick webinar. We do have time now for some questions. In the meantime, as we have some coming in here, so let's look at the first one. How have others quantified the ROI of service virtualization? So there's many ways. I think the most common is reducing wait times, right? On the traditional use of QA is when instead of waiting for data, waiting for an environment to be ready, waiting to be able to do an end-to-end integrated test, being able to do it whenever you need, it's easy. The other one is infrastructure, to stand up backend systems that you need to train your employees or to test your systems. It's very costly. I mean, a virtual server can be north of $20,000 a year, easy. And we're talking about just one VM on a corporate system. When you replace dozens of them with virtual services all running in a few containers or in a single virtual machine, easily pays for the cost of the software just there too. So there's many different, and I'm not even going to cover the security aspect of it, better quality of the experience of the, but these are some ways. Grigori, there's one question for you here. Can I host my virtual learning environment in the cloud?
Great question. Absolutely. So service virtualization solutions should be agnostic of where you're hosting these virtual services, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. From Parasoft's perspective, we can host our virtual solutions in AWS, Azure, or on dedicated VMs. So cloud-based deployments are fully supported and should be supported for different types of scalability, right? So short answer, yes, and longer answer is absolutely.
All right. So related to that, I have one here. Can I configure virtual services to only use the virtual service when the live one is unavailable?
Yes, and that's also another advantage of leveraging service virtualization here is being able to define these custom failover flows, right? So the ability to detect whether a live service is down or unavailable based on either a health check or response status codes. All of that logic can be built into either a virtual service or some sort of routing mechanism like a proxy or a monitor. For Parasoft, those types of capabilities come out of the box. So the configuration there is minimal, and it's important to have that functionality in order to support complex flows.
Cool. Great. There's one here, and the way I understand this question, I think it's related to when you mix virtual services with live services. So the question is, can virtualized services update records in a database? Like, I guess it's an actual database here in the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's always going to come down to the capabilities of the service virtualization solution that you're using for these virtual learning environments. So in the case of Parasoft, for example, we have database query capabilities, so you can connect to a database and push push any queries, push any kind of modification to that database as a part of the logic of your virtual services.
Cool. I think these are the questions we have here for now. For everyone watching, thank you again for your time, for joining us. If you want to get started today, you have the QR code here on the left for the community edition of Virtualize. That would allow you to get started right now. You can also get in touch with us, with me directly, with Grigori, or through that link you see on the top, request a demo. And you can watch some of our customers actually sharing their success stories on the recordings of our Parasoft Summit 2021 that happened a few months ago. But all the video recordings and the stories are available for on-demand watching. Have a great day, everyone, and see you next time.